You're listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. Hello, Cyclothids, and welcome to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. You might notice that today's episode is coming to you one day earlier than normal, and the reason for that is I wanted to get it out to you so that you have the opportunity to come see me at the Gym State Comic-Con if you happen to be in the Boise area. I will be there Saturday and Sunday, the 1st and 2nd of April, and my booth number is 73. So if you are interested in coming by, picking up a copy of my book, chatting with me in person, I'll be doing a little bit of live recording. If you just want to meet and see me face to face, it would be a great opportunity. So let's get into the episode. My name is Robert Walker, author of Session Zero, the DMG to writing great campaigns in any system. And this is my show where I teach collaborative storytellers how to have great campaigns using psychology. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into dragons. More than any other creature, dragons are a symbol of role-playing games, especially tabletop role-playing games. From the savage white, the majestic gold, they represent the greatest perils that adventurers will ever face in their hope to claim fame, in their challenge to rid the world of tyranny and evil. And moreover, the defeat of a dragon represents the greatest rewards for a player possible with the dragon's hoard. Countless books and supplements have been written on dragons, and it seems that every monster manual or bestiary or monster companion, whatever it is that you are taking your creatures from in whatever tabletop role-playing game you are playing, they expand and enhance the lore and literature of the dragon. And there's so many out there. I mean, early on, D&D sort of had the traditional true and chromatic dragons, but now there's a plethora of them. Force dragons, time dragons, spirit dragons, dracoliches. They go on and on and on, and it seems like every new supplement contains some sort of new interesting dragon or type of dragon. There's also the dragonkin or the dragonborn. There's drakes. There's a whole number of creatures that are dragon adjacent and character classes that you can play that have dragon blood. They are enriched in every tabletop role-playing game, it seems, and for good reason. Dragons are a reminder that D&D or tabletop games take place in a world of fantasy, of wonder, of magic, and it's very far from the mundane. But they also have roots in our own lore and our own mythology. Most of our cultures have some reference to dragons in some way or fashion, from the eastern parts of the world to even the western parts of the world. There are these myths about these creatures that could take to the sky and were as large as dinosaurs. And perhaps it is just that we have found the bones of these great ancient beasts and we attributed to them the idea of dragons, but they have a place in our real world. So there's something about them that ties to our inner psyche and makes them, I think, in some ways a little more believable, just because we know that our own history is enriched with lore of these creatures that we are engaging with in a fantasy world. Now, in my mind, of all the supplements and of all the material that exists out there around dragons, there was one supplement that stands above the rest, and that came from 2003 by Andy Collins, Skip Williams, and James Wyatt, and that supplement is called the Draconomicon. What was so great about this book that I still use in my current campaigns, even though the editions don't match, but there's so much rich information in here. It goes into dragons from every angle. It talks about their body, their physiology, their life cycle, their senses, the way they fight. It teaches players how you can get a dragon egg and keep it incubated so that you can raise it, how to make a dragon a cohort, how to become a dragon rider. There's prestige classes that give you all sorts of different ways of either interacting with dragons as friendly creatures or as a dragon hunter. It gives DMs a plethora of information about dragons, including new spells, new feats, how to run dragon encounters, how to build layers. It has new monsters that are in there. It even has a primer on the Draconic language for which you can build puzzles or things of that nature to use in your game. In my mind, it's one of the most immersive looks into dragons that has ever existed, and I use it all the time. So what I want to do today is give you a look at 3 different aspects that are detailed very heavily in this book. And the first one is going to be the dragon's life cycle and how that life cycle affects their outlook and psychology. The second one is incubating a dragon egg or rearing a dragon for the behalf of your players. And of course, the third one is their hoard and what that sort of means to the dragon. So first, let's talk about the dragon life cycle. Now, most of us already know that dragons are very long-lived creatures. This book suggests that there is some debate among scholars about whether or not dragons are immortal or not, but it also gives some really interesting rules for how long dragons live based on the type of dragon that they are. But let's look at their typical life cycle. So first, when they are born, they are known as a wormling, and that wormling stage lasts between 0 and 5 years, at which point they move on to a very young age, which is from age 6 to about 15. Young age then goes from 16 to 25 years. Dragons become juveniles from 26 to 50 years. Young adults between 51 and 100 years. Adults between 101 and 200. Mature adults between 201 and 400 years. Then they become old, 401 to 600 years. Very old would be 601 to 800 years. Ancient dragons being 801 to 1,000 years old. Worms, 1,001 to 1,200 years old. Great worms being the oldest and largest category of dragons, being 1,201 years and beyond. And here is the very interesting thing is, yes, a great worm dragon is 1,201 years old, and most of these other time gaps they get bigger and bigger, but the great worm time gap is massive, and they illustrate this concept known as twilight, which is the time that a dragon's power actually begins to wane and they approach death. Because a really fascinating thing about dragons is even as they become old, very old, ancient worms, great worms, they're still getting stronger and more powerful, unlike many of the other races who take on debilitations as they age into their older years. Dragons don't start to decline until they enter their twilight, which is much, much, much later. And depending on the kind of dragon, they can be extremely old when that happens. So, for example, a black dragon has about 2,200 years before they start to enter their twilight, whereas the longest living of the true dragons, the gold, has 4,400 years before they start entering their twilight. So if your party encounters a great worm gold dragon, even if they're, beneficial to the party, if they're friendly, you're talking about a creature that is between 1,200 and 4,400 years old. Just an incredible amount of time and an incredible amount of knowledge that they have accumulated in their life. So what I find really fascinating about this extremely long lifespan, even for the shorter-lived dragons, you're talking 2,200 years, one of the most important elements shaping their behavior is the fact that they are never going to be rushed. Even the most impatient of dragons is likely to be more patient than any other living creature. If you think of it in this way, consider the fact when elves are portrayed, elves are displayed as these incredibly patient and calm beings because they know that their lifespan is so much longer, and they see the youth and the shortness of the shorter-lived races as sort of folly and rushing to their mortal ends. A dragon can look at an elf and see their life pass by several times over in the course of a draconic life. So even to a dragon, an elf is a short-lived race. So this long lifespan, their longevity, could perhaps be the major source of the trope of dragons' vanity and their arrogance. A single dragon can watch a parade of beings come and go during their life. How can they consider such creatures as anything more than inferiors when they watch so many of them, even the longest lived humanoids, come and go as they are still simply growing up. So as a dungeon master, how I would use this in a game is I would never allow my players to sort of dictate a dragon into action for the moment. A dragon could spring into action quickly if it found its own life in peril, or if it had to protect its mate or its offspring or its hoard. But otherwise, the constraints of human action being based on their life and having to get things accomplished now simply aren't going to affect the mental state of a dragon. If characters come to a dragon beseeching help and saying this must happen now, the dragon will likely laugh at them and think, well, you foolish mortal, now is so short. Like, I will outlive whatever travesty it is you're talking about here. So I don't think that forcing a dragon into action based on time constraints is ever going to be an effective tool for characters. And so I have to find ways in order for a dragon to be, if a party member wants to push a dragon into action, it needs to be something that directly affects the dragon in an imminent way. I think that's the only time that a dragon is going to spring into action without very careful, very deliberate thought and really meticulous planning. So now let's talk about incubating a dragon egg. Let's say your party has the rare opportunity to defeat a dragon and they find that that dragon was nesting an egg. And of course, whenever that happens, the party usually does one of two things. They either want to sell the egg and make a lot of money, or I think more often the prospect of having a dragon companion in the party immediately rears into the party's head, and they think, well, we should definitely incubate and hatch this egg so that we can have our own little dragon in the party, which I think is a very fun story. The Draconomicon goes into detail about all of the true dragons and gives rules for how to incubate an egg. I'm going to share those rules with you now so that if you decide to include something like this in your campaign, you've got a pretty cut and clear idea of what these eggs will need for the players to successfully incubate them. So let's start with black dragons. For a black dragon, the egg must be immersed in acid strong enough to deal at least 1d4 points of damage per round, or it must be sunk in a swamp, bog, or marsh. For a blue dragon, for half of each day, the egg must be kept in temperatures of 90 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, followed by half a day at 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a really interesting and intricate one. To incubate a brass dragon, the egg needs to be kept in an open flame or in a temperature of at least 140 degrees Fahrenheit. For bronze, the egg must be immersed in a sea or ocean, or someplace where tide waters flow over it at least twice a day. Copper dragons must be immersed in acid strong enough to deal 1d4 points of damage per round of exposure, or packed in cool sand or clay between 40 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. For a gold dragon, the egg must be kept in an open flame or in a temperature of at least 140 degrees. For greens, the egg must be immersed in acid strong enough to deal 1d4 points of damage per round, or buried in leaves moistened with rainwater. For a red dragon, the egg must be kept in an open flame or temperatures of 140 degrees. For silver, the egg must be buried in snow, encased in ice, or kept at a temperature below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And for white, again, snow, ice, or temperatures below 0 degrees. That gives you a pretty clear idea of what needs to happen to an egg if your characters stumble upon it. Now, what's interesting is there's probably a period where the dragon has stopped tending it in order to face the adventurers. What happens is every hour that the conditions are not met, the incubating egg must make a constitution roll with using the constitution of the wormling of that creature type. And that is a DC of 15 plus 1 per previous check. So every hour they have to make this check if the conditions are not right. And if they fail that check, the egg is destroyed. It's no longer viable. However, the other really important thing that you need to know if you decide to incorporate this into your game is how much time is left on incubation. These dragon eggs incubate for a very long time. The longest one being the silver dragon or the red dragon, which have to incubate for 660 days. I mean, so you're talking darn near 2 years that these eggs are incubating. So if they get it at the very beginning of the cycle, your players have a lot of time that they are going to have to spend working on this little project of theirs. And not just that, once the egg hatches and they start to rear the dragon, I'm not going to go into the rearing rules specifically, but it requires a lot of charisma checks and sort of diplomacy between the creature. But the really big thing is that if they're intending to ride this dragon, in some cases, you're looking at like getting into the young age before they're a rideable dragon. So that's like 16 years later. So if this is something you want to incorporate in your game, then sort of like the dragon mindset, you need to make sure your players have the time to incorporate this sort of a task. So the last aspect of dragons I want to talk about then is, why do dragons hoard treasure? When you think about dragons, oftentimes the image that might come to mind is a dragon coiled up on a pile of gold. Or you might think of the desolation of Smaug, where the dragon is literally swimming in a sea of gold coins and valuable treasures. Some scholars, quote unquote, in the D&D world have said that dragons are like pack rats or like kobolds. They just want to seek out shiny things. But what's unique about dragons is they crave items of monetary value or of significant value, not just shiny objects. They're well aware of the value of their possessions. So when faced with a selection of treasure, even the most virtuous dragon would like to take it all. If it has to choose, though, the dragon is going to tend to favor the most valuable item. The Draconomicon details that dragons derive immense intellectual satisfaction from their hoard, and they keep an accurate mental inventory of the items in their hoard and a running total of the hoard's total monetary value. So they're sort of like these ancient mystical accountants, if you will. So what the book goes on to detail is something I think is very clever, is that a dragon's hoard grants it status among its own kind, which means that for dragons of the same age, they would compare hoard values, considering magic items and how many coins they have, to decide which of these dragon actually holds a higher status in draconic society. This can have all sorts of implications. It can mean that when it is time for a dragon to mate, a dragon with a larger hoard is going to have a better access to a desirable mate. They also tend to boast about the value of their hoard, sort of like, the rich and the aristocratic do in our own society, having a large amount of wealth, and what your portfolio value is sort of something I see happening in, behind closed doors in draconic society. All these talks about what they have acquired and what their overall hoard portfolio looks like, so to speak. From a player perspective, of course, what this means is that when it comes to defeating any particular type of creature, the dragon is a very desirable target simply because of the amount of treasure that can be acquired when they are defeated. If you looked at the old 2nd edition and 3rd edition monster stat blocks, dragons early on were the only creature that had triple standard treasure, meaning you could go to the hells and defeat a pit fiend, or you face a dragon of the same challenge rating. You're going to get 3 times as much treasure for defeating that dragon as you would the pit fiend, even though the challenges are going to be the same. So the bang for your buck as a player to defeat a dragon is significantly higher. So I hope all of this information has given you some useful things to incorporate into your stories if you're going to be having your players engage with dragons in any way. Maybe it gives you a new way to look at them, but we'll take a little bit deeper delve and give you a couple more ideas as we head into tricks of the trade. For tricks of the trade today, I thought it would be really interesting to talk about how to have dragons in the party. Now, there's a couple different ways that a dungeon master could go about this. The first way would be allowing characters being played by the PCs or being played by your party to actually be dragons. They could actually choose a draconic race. They can play as a dragon, find a starting level that allows them to use some level adjustments and begin play as like a wormling or a very young dragon, and then be a party member gaining class levels from that point. This is a really fun one. I've used it in some of my own games. I've played as a dragon in a couple of games, and it is really interesting. The challenge, of course, that you might run into is that it's a little bit difficult to have a character jump into a party if you're level 1 as even a wormling, which is going to have a level of adjustment between 3 and 5, meaning that early on, that dragon character is going to be much more powerful than the rest of the party. So there's a couple ways you can do that. The first way you can do it is they start more powerful, but then like the first 3 times that party members gain a level, the dragon character doesn't actually level up. They will just be waiting until the party reaches that same effective level of power as them before they start increasing levels. You could also mitigate this by having the party start maybe at level 4 or level 5, so they'll have a little bit of adventuring experience, but the dragon could then have its race adjustment and have maybe 1 or 2 levels in a character class. Another way to have dragons in your party would, of course, be to use a dragon as a DM NPC or Dungeon Master's NPC. The challenge in this situation that I would warn you about is that you're going to have to be very careful so that your NPC here does not steal the spotlight from the rest of the characters. It should be a support tool, not a main character. And I think that's really important of a distinction to make. So it's probably of these 3 ideas the one I would be least likely to suggest, especially long term. If you want to do this for a short-term period of time, I think that it's perfectly acceptable, but don't make the entire campaign about the character that you as a DM are running in the party. Make it about the heroes that your players are running. And the last suggestion I will give you will work especially effectively if you're in a smaller group of players. 2 to 3 would be an ideal number here, but to allow each player to have a bonded dragon as a companion with them. And you don't have to necessarily do this with the leadership feat. You could sort of count these as sort of supplemental cohorts, or you think of like the Aragon series where each of your characters might be bonded to a dragon that is their companion and their friend. They learn to ride it, and it assists them in all sorts of other adventures. What's really fun about this is you can include a lot of like aerial combats and unique things that you don't get to have in a lot of typical campaigns. But I think it also does a really interesting thing where you have each player can sort of have like a unique bond to a different color of dragon, and you can just have sort of a very interesting party dynamic that way, because you have these new resources based on the dragon's breath weapon and their natural abilities. Maybe you have some that can breathe underwater. So it really opens up the world to exploration in ways that maybe traditional low-level characters might not have. So that's it for Tricks of the Trade. Let's go ahead and move on to Knowledge Check. For our Knowledge Check today, I want to look at a book that we've talked about on the show before. We've had the author on the show, which is The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Keith Ammann. And I just want to briefly give you a couple of points from his section on dragons. And that is going to be how they react in combat. I think one really important thing that he denotes is as long as it's available on its turn, the dragon's preferable attack is its breath weapon. They all get this, and even wormlings get this. And what they will do is they should reposition, use their movement ability to reposition their place on the combat map so that they can affect as many creatures as possible. I think the only time they would favor an attack over a breath weapon is if they can only isolate a single creature, and it's just not going to be beneficial. Like the dragon might know that this one creature is resistant to their breath weapon or whatever. But if they can hit more than a single creature with a breath weapon, that is almost always going to be their default when it's available. So try and remember that as a DM. And then if the breath weapon is not available, dragons have spectacular multi-attack. So use Frightful Presence if they can, and if you have a cowering or frightened character, they're going to be more susceptible to a dragon's attack. So use that multi-attack, the claw-claw-bite combo. And then, of course, the last thing to remember with dragons, and this goes back to what we were talking about early on, their ability to look at time very differently from other creatures is when they are seriously wounded. So this is just like a little below half of their hit points. A dragon is going to get out of there. It considers its life far too valuable to risk on a foe that's capable of doing it harm. So it will leave, regroup, regather itself, and go back and face these creatures later. It could start a revenge plot that it might not get to completing for another 100 years when it goes after the descendants of the people who were attacking it. Dragons are not stuck in the moment. They're not going to stand and fight if a fight is not going their way. And I think that is really important for a DM to remember in order to make a campaign believable. You have to think about what these creatures are thinking inside their heads. What does their psychology say? What would their actual mode of attack be when they are on the ropes? Obviously, they're going to want to defend their hoard, but realistically, they're going to want to defend their lives. They know their hoard intricately. They have an accurate accounting of the items and the value of their hoard, and they have plenty of time to plot a revenge that's going to get all of their stuff back to them. So use that. Use a dragon's escape to make your campaign more interesting and put it on this, let the players forget that this dragon is coming after them, because likely they're going to think they bested this creature that ran off. They got away with its treasure, but it has, 10, 20 of their lifetimes to plan a revenge. So give it that, give them the opportunity to really be dragon mindset. And I think that'll be a unique experience for your characters. Anyways, that is all for today, Cyclothids. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you're listening to this on the 1st or the 2nd, come down and see me at Gem State Comic Con in Boise. And as always, feel free to reach out to me, leave a rating or review. You can also find me on Instagram at dungeons_dragons_psychology, where you can find a Linktree link to all of my socials and my website and anything else that you want to use to get in contact with me. Until next time, we'll see you next session.